Okay, we're ready to go. So we have now a fireside chat on the new DHS National Cybersecurity Risk Management Center. And I'd like to introduce Norma Graham, who's going to do the fireside chatting.
Thank you. Well, Bob is a little disappointed already that there is no fire, but I am very happy to be here with Bob today, and really thank you to Georgetown and Comcast and Freddie Mac and the Chamber for a wonderful conference. And Bob, I think almost everyone knows Bob. Bob Kolaski is the director of the new DHS National Risk Management Center, which was announced just, 2 months ago?
End of July, 45 days ago.
45 days ago, that would be 6 hours, 32 minutes, and 5 seconds. And Bob has worked at the Department of Homeland Security for quite some time. We have worked together on many issues, and he really is a leader on critical infrastructure and cybersecurity issues, and really is a wonderful leader for this new organization. Now, everyone was waiting with bated breath to hear about the new National Risk Management Center, what it is, what does it do, what does it mean, and we are going to spend some time on that. But just, I think, 12 minutes ago, luckily for Bob, the White House has released its brand new cybersecurity strategy. And there are so many pieces of that we're very excited to talk about today, and certainly the center is a piece of that. So Bob, why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and we'll go from there.
Yes, so as Norma said, around 4 o'clock, the administration released a national cybersecurity strategy. It is the first update of a full national cybersecurity strategy since 2003, and it is the overarching strategic document that will guide executive branch cybersecurity activities. I think crucially a couple things. It builds off the national security strategy and uses the same structure. So, very much in the theme of, you'll hear from me, cybersecurity is a national security issue. Cyber offense and defense as national security component pieces. There are a number of pillars that are consistent with the national security strategy within the cybersecurity strategy. There are things that are directly relevant where DHS really plays a leadership role in things like protecting federal networks and taking new actions to modernize federal IT to get to networks that are easier to protect. That's something that NPPD and DHS are in a leadership role, protecting critical infrastructure, working with infrastructure owners and operators, building out increased risk management capability through public-private partnerships, thinking about critical elements of that. You're going to hear a lot of what I reference at the work we're doing in the National Risk Management Center, and those themes are in the National Cybersecurity Strategy, so it's always helpful to have high-level strategic documents that then drive down to programmatic implementation, which we're doing within NPPD. And then there are other elements of the cybersecurity strategy that are things that I think as a community we've all recognized as important for a long time, that cyber is a combination of offense and defense, that there's a need to not just let adversary nation states go unabated in their activities, and we got to figure out whatever we can do and be aggressive at changing the context by which they are conducting their cyber operations. There are elements of that, elements of deterrence, elements of sanctioning, elements of offensive activities or the willingness to take offensive activities that are incumbent in the strategy. And so, I think that's important. The other thing that's clear as we release this cyber strategy that has become increasingly clear over the last several years is we got near peer adversaries from nation states, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. We can argue how close to near peer they are, but we got nation states that have pretty sophisticated capabilities, and we need the whole unified effort of the public and private sector, the national security apparatus, the elements of government to go after those threats. And I think the cybersecurity strategy will help organize our activity.
I mean, it obviously is a big deal that it's the first strategy that's come out in 15 years that is looking at a whole of government approach when we look at what offensive and defensive means for critical infrastructure. And in that time, as you've worked at DHS and people in the audience have been working to both, I think, talk to their C-suite about what cyber risk means, why systemic risk is something that needs to be managed by the whole of the organization and the business is really important. We are seeing, and all the companies in the room have been working very hard to manage their cyber risk. But we have talked about that line, if you will, between what is expected of companies to manage their risk and the above the line. And it sounds like this strategy is designed, as well as the center, to talk about what will the whole of government resources and the new risk management center do to help companies work on some of that. So maybe talk a little bit between the new strategy and the center, and what are you looking for in some of your new projects?
Sure. So, I think that's a good way to think about cyber risk. As a whole in our strategic approach, I hope it sort of gets at the below the line stuff that all, to keep going with that analogy, that's the responsibility of an organization. We need to build capacity so that there's less below the line stuff, capacity building. And certainly DHS, the federal government, is there to help support capacity building efforts. And so we want to continue to do what we can to elevate the tools that companies, let's just run with companies, that companies need to manage cybersecurity risk. But to your point, companies are taking those increasingly seriously. There are more tools out there. There's more. The NIST framework has helped in a lot of ways to really go at increasing, the overall level of baseline capability of cybersecurity in a lot of different places. The National Risk Management Center fundamentally does sit at the sort of, to go with the pyramid, at the sort of place where perhaps there's not incentives to go further, or the risk that belongs to a company is owned actually by somebody else, or there are other elements of the risk. So there's a cross-sector element, there's a cross-organizational element, there's shared things that perhaps can't be controlled by companies making their own risk management decisions, or the companies don't have the incentive to make the investments, or it's impossible to sort of do company by company investment. And there are a lot of different elements of which the government should have strategies to intercede to address what I'll call shared risk right now. And so the center, a lot of our activities will be looking for those areas of shared risk and inspiring, catalyzing planning activity around the public and private sector, the whole interagency, to go after some of that shared risk.
So in the vein you have taught, the Secretary, the Vice President, especially at the New York Summit, about the tri-sector, cross-sector risk. That's really one area that I think people would like to hear about. And the second is really about supply chain risk. And we could probably talk about either for hours, but take both briefly and talk about what you're doing there and what you may see the outcomes could be.
So one of the pieces of feedback we got that led us to establish the National Risk Management Center, and as we established the National Risk Management Center, was the need to have focused efforts on where there were, again, I'll keep going with pockets of shared risk that are worth putting concerted focus efforts. And two of our early priorities that are consistent with what you just asked are working with the tri-sector and working particularly with the comms and IT sector and ICT supply chain. So I'll take both of those in that order. The tri-sector that you referred to, Norma, is communications, electricity, banking, and finance. And over the last several years, senior folks representing big companies in those sectors have tried to push us to convene a mechanism for those three sectors to work together because of the idea that there's shared risk. Electricity, electricity depends on communications depends on electricity, finance, that sort of thing. And that there's a need to help each other, to have confidence. All three of those industries want to have confidence that the other parts of the industry are taking this seriously, and then they want to see areas where what they can do can help reinforce resilience across those three sectors. So they were driving, and they've been driving through a number of calls to create a tri-sector body. We are on the cusp of chartering it, and it will have representatives. It will be chartered and chaired by the Department of Energy, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Treasury, as well as the leadership of the three sector coordinating councils. And then we're going to work issues together. I mean, in some ways it's as simple as that. The first three priorities that we've come together around are doing a better job of feeding sector understanding into intelligence collection requirements and getting intelligence collection and setting up processes so that intelligence, what we know about threats, can get in the hands of those the big companies in those three sectors, representatives of those sectors, to take action to mitigate risk. Secondly is cross-sector playbooks where there's actually sort of doing the planning of, okay, if this scenario happens, how is it going to play out? How is what I'm going to do impact what you're going to do? And work through that sort of stuff. And let's put it in a plan. Let's exercise across the sectors. And the third area is really identifying what are the most critical functional pieces within how the electricity sector operates, how the grid operates, how communications is delivered, where everyone knows each other's sort of critical nodes and they can prioritize their resilience activities around that. So that's what we're trying to do with that. It's an advancement in the critical infrastructure partnership structure that we've set up, because it's really starting to get focused on some concentrated areas of risk that transcend sectors and working it through that way. So that's that. In terms of the ICT supply chain task force, at a basic level, and I don't want to sort of go too monologue, this is supposed to be a discussion. At a basic level, what we're trying to do is bring the IT comms companies together with the government, define elements of supply chain risk in terms of hardware, software, shared services, and start to break down where the component pieces exist, how to get more trust into the system, right. How to make sure we're not introducing things through foreign ownership adversaries, certain kinds of foreign ownership adversaries or small businesses or unknowns into a supply chain. As we learn from each other through that, how then we get that word out to help people be better buyers. Within the federal government, we feel like we have a long way to go in our own supply chain to be better purchasers of software and hardware, but how can we translate that into the critical infrastructure community as well?
Okay. So in the case of the tri-sector model, that seems like a very specific and focused example where the sectors have been working together anyways, and you're helping to convene. But if for other sectors who are in the room, what does it really mean to come to the center? And what types of resources and things do you plan to offer? Because I do think there are a lot of people in the room who have worked collaboratively with DHS over time, and they're trying to distinguish what the center will do versus maybe other pieces. And I think whether it's other pieces at DHS or other pieces in other agencies. Sure. So talk about that.
Yeah, so I will correct one thing from the introduction from the gentleman at the podium who's called it Cybersecurity Risk Management Center. It is not a cybersecurity risk management center. It is a risk management center. Here, we're at the cybersecurity session. We talked at the cybersecurity summit. But it's the reason that distinction matters is we really want to focus on things that present strategic risks to the national critical infrastructure. And I don't mean to correct you that it was your fault. I just want to make this clear that cyber is a lot of the means that's going to happen, the ways that strategic effect to critical infrastructure can be caused, but cyber's not the only means. And
so you're getting cyber and physical together?
Yeah, we've been very active on the preparation in front of Hurricane Florence in seeing if there was anything that might have happened because of that hurricane that's now a tropical depression that could cause real significant critical infrastructure impacts. And so going to services that we offer and kind of how to think of us as a center, I like to say we're a planning and analysis center. We're not an operations center. Most of you have been in the room with a place like the NKIC or other things where you see pizza and TVs and liaison officers.
We see people working very hard first, and the pizzas are only there because we've made them work for 24 hours.
Yes. But that's not the image you should have with the National Risk Management Center. It is a place where we do planning and an analysis that we hope to have the ability to regularly in projects bring people in more regularly than we have from outside, bring the interagency together to do workshops, to put things together, but it's not a 24/7 center around that. So it's a planning and analysis center. Service things we do, we are one of the leaders in the federal government, if not the leader, in modeling critical infrastructure impacts of an incident happening, whether it's a hurricane bearing down on North Carolina or whether it's a cyber attack that could take out operations of these critical infrastructures, things we saw last year. What would be the cascading impacts of that kind of center? We think that kind of modeling is useful in the middle of an incident, but that modeling is also useful for planning purposes, and so that's something that certainly we want to do. Helping prioritize critical infrastructure for a lot of different risk management decisions is something that we do within the National Risk Management Center, and we'll work with industry and our interagency partners to do. And then really, I hope, putting together planning teams to go after kind of the biggest, go after a big set of challenges of areas where we think as a country maybe we're taking on a little too much risk.
So there's definitely a lot of opportunity in again, cross-sector we're seeing, but there's certainly a lot of sectors right now in the economy that maybe they're used to being managing privacy issues, or maybe they're traditionally regulated for safety and some security. We do have a lot of sectors where that cyber physical broader risk management structure really needs some help. And when you think about the sector-specific agencies, we're trying to see, we've talked about transportation, we've talked about health, there are a lot of different sectors that are trying to figure out how to manage and aggregate risk. And so I know you want companies or entities to come to you with ideas. Are you working with some of the other agencies to look at whether these sectors or others? And then we'll answer that. And then I want to talk a little bit about international issues as well.
Sure. So, all this depends on working together, sharing information, actually getting to the point where you're talking about where risk lies, concentrations of things, requires at a minimum trust in authorities. And so on the authorities side, the Critical Infrastructure Partnership Advisory Council authorities have gotten us to a place where we've set pretty robust structures, coordinating councils, public-private partnerships. The SSAs rely heavily on that to get most of the significant critical infrastructure owners in any one sector to the table. To get vulnerable, so that allows us to have a shared discussion on vulnerabilities and risks and potential solutions without worrying about competitive information, or, competitive issues, or without worrying about, getting the details of what's in those discussions. Then we rely on sort of the Protected Critical Infrastructure Information Authority so that people can actually businesses can submit information about their own vulnerabilities without worrying about that being foiable or subject to sunshine laws, or that just by acknowledging a vulnerability that you're somehow liable because you've acknowledged a vulnerability and not mitigated it. So that helps authority-wise. Trust, I think trust is something that we've worked really hard within DHS and NPPD to build over time, and its consistency. It's seeing value in things. It's following up on what you say you're going to do, and it's not breaking, it's not breaking the commitment you make. And I think generally we're at a pretty good place with the critical infrastructure community. I think, with the sector-specific agencies, we work regularly at them and seeing where, DHS has tools that we can bring to bear to augment, a lot of the sector-specific agencies aren't fundamentally security agencies. So we have security tools to support their efforts in their security obligations.
And I think that's a really important point. And maybe within the scope of the new cybersecurity strategy and the risk management structure center, what we want is that collaborative partnership between DHS, who understands security and cyber, with the SSA. What we're seeing sometimes in other agencies is they are wanting to build additional capacity in their own agencies on some of these issues. And I think from the private sector's perspective, we want and need a seamless approach to managing security and risk. And so as much as this strategy helps the agencies work together, that's important. And for people who aren't familiar with PCII authority, the Protected Critical Information Authority, Infrastructure Information, thank you. It's a great program at DHS where you can work collaboratively with them and you get the protections he talked about. Federal FOIA, state and local sunshine laws, and protection against regulatory reach back. And that may be something, as you talk about this center and how people work with you, for more people to understand, because I do think people want to work with the center. As you talk about what it means, that's important, but those authorities to help protect companies, I think people are trying to understand, because they're being besieged from governors and mayors and other people who all want to help.
Yeah, I mean, at a sort of bigger level, if that keeps being a limiting factor, we have to recognize those limiting factors. And, in the ambition that I think Secretary Nielsen has given us, let's identify those limiting factors and let's go after those limiting factors. And, that's not all within the remit of the Department of Homeland Security, but, let's have the dialogue with Congress and within the executive branch of, hey, things still are limiting our ability to collectively work together. And I don't want to be scared of those things. I want to say, okay, this is what we can do until we change some of the rules. And I think most business I talk to, I can, this is the amount of legal risk I'm willing to take and doing things that I think are smart decisions. Please help me get to a different place.
So I think that would be the call to action for those in the room. Start making your list. You can give them to Bob on the way out. No, you're welcome. I'm sure they'll appreciate that. Yes. So are there specific projects as you look ahead? There are these very core specific things Secretary Nielsen has sort of tasked you to do. You're working your way through those. There's a lot of other things you want. What are your probably next few priorities?
Yeah, I mean, we are aligning the work we've been doing, supporting election infrastructure, secretaries of state election directors, making sure that our elections are secure, the actual voting process in the run-up to the 2018 election. That's front of mind. We remain concerned over foreign influence over elections and propaganda and our adversaries trying to sow discord and things like that. Where that's a strategic risk right now that, we're doing some work within MPPD that we're aligned with on that. I don't want to diminish the importance of that over the next few weeks, and then going into the 2020 election. But then sort of to the core National Risk Management Center business processes, the thing I'm most excited about us doing quickly is working with industry and our interagency partners to identify a set of national critical functions, which are the things that critical infrastructure produces that are absolutely essential to national security, economic security, or the functions that have come through. And putting that identification together for the purpose of doing risk prioritization, and that'll get us broken out of the little bit of the sector by sector model. Well, what are the big cross-cutting functions? One we've been talking about a lot is position and navigation timing services, and so many of the sectors rely on that, and that there's potential that something could happen that would degrade P&T services in a way that's too much national risk. And as we identify those and then have conversations, we put in the structures to get industry government together to talk about where our priorities should be, and then we're going to pick a list of priorities working together, and then that will really guide sort of the 2019 part of our agenda. But what do I want to do differently? There's a need to be sensitive for national security reasons on some of this, but I want enough community-wide discussions that you get a sense of where our priorities are consistent with the strategic direction we've been
But
given.
how do you you go from the inverted funnel? I mean, you think about national critical functions, it's the basics. The lights stay on, you can get money, you have clean water, right? How do you, obviously these are things you've been working on for some time. So do you have a set list and you're going to be talking to people about adding to that and then prioritizing from there?
We have an idea of what a list would look like, but really, as part of the stand-up, and we're planning a workshop in October, and I've been talking to a lot of different people. We want sort of a final set list, not a final in that it won't change, but a set list that really guides our activities. And so, we're in the process of working through a set list.
So that'll be the next conference that will roll out the list of national critical functions. No, just teasing.
And part of the reason for this thinking is those of you who do work closely enough with op centers or living close to the day-to-day recognize, and we certainly see it, just the pounding of things that are going on in cyberspace on a day-to-day basis. And, we get to read the intelligence of things that people might be trying, and it's just hard to navigate all of that until you've got okay, these things might be going on, but these are the things that I think are the most important. And if we can align, unfortunately, what we think, if what we see is the adversaries seeming to understand the things that are most critical, that helps direct our activity. And so the prioritization isn't just for planning, but it's also to understand, how to make sense of the million dots of information that, that's good that we're creating those million dots of information. And going back to what the center is and what it isn't, the NCIC exists to get every single piece of information it could possibly get. We can help the NCIC, prioritize how that information might be then leading to a change in the risk environment.
I'm going to ask you one last question and maybe go to questions from the audience. What if you had, what are the top, I didn't warn Bob about this question, by the way. What are the top 2 things you would want every company in this room to think about and then come to talk to the center about? You could pick 1 or 5.
Your risk? What you're doing about your risk. No, I mean, so to some extent, right, and I used this analogy when we were talking in preparation for that. The center wants to be a place where we're really having the conversations kind of at the chief risk officer board level where is cyber risk existing in your systems that you think you need help managing, and where is there cyber risk that you think might be out there, or other risks that you think might be out there that perhaps you need somebody else's help to manage. And I think it does require the board level conversations and thinking about risk. But the word that's most important in what we're trying to do is management. And I've set the goal for reduction. Like, I think we should be held accountable for 5 years from now. Have we reduced cyber risk? Management suggests there are a lot of strategies for reducing cyber risk, but the ultimate goal, hopefully, is not just managing the risk or transferring it or accepting it. Let's go at reducing risk. And so I hope corporations are really thinking about what they can do to reduce their exposure.
I'll say this and then definitely go to questions. I think there's been a dramatic change in awareness and understanding at the C-suite level, even in the last 24 months, and more on the systemic operational level as to what cyber means to companies. It's more than just the data side. And sometimes you hate to joke that it's, you're lucky if only your data is stolen. But when we think about the operational impacts to the economy, national and homeland security, I do think that people are starting to understand that more. So if the center can help bring that greater awareness at a higher level and think about what resources make sense for companies, and they can ask you for help, I think that will be a huge change. So we're going to go to some questions. The one thing I would ask everybody is just say your name and your organization before you ask your question.
Thank you. Rami Separat from Freddie Mac. I'm just curious to get your thoughts around the approach, the classical approach to risk management, which is you kind of define a risk appetite, where you below the appetite, how you accept risk, or even I just heard you talk about transferring risk. So those are some of the classical practices of risk management. How do you think the center is going to transform some of those thinking as you analyzing the data and as you hopefully sharing that data back with the private sector?
That's a hard one. Let me start by yes. No, I recognize you're describing those as classical approaches, and I've read enough risk management literature to agree with you. But the federal government, those are not classical approaches within the federal government of risk management, right? That the conversation of risk transfer and risk acceptance and that sort of stuff is stuff that's been really hard for us to be explicit about in a lot of areas. And the reason I bring up that point is one of the things I hope we can do is align risk management models in thinking a little bit more so that we can explain how we approach risk, and you explain risk, and we can start to sort of understand that because we've got this different theory of our responsibility of risk management, we might be creating inefficiencies there. And so, I don't know that you'll ever hear me say, hey, we agreed to accept that risk explicitly. I don't have to sign a statement because I'm a public company to say that. But sort of having the implicit discussion that the things that we didn't put at the top of the list are areas where we've agreed to accept a little risk, or that there are other risk management strategies out there other than going hard at putting security in a system. So I think one of the things hopefully we can do as a center is create a little more synergy between what I think are a couple different risk management theories.
Aren't you overall also trying to help companies or entities understand where their risk fits in a broader world? I mean, I do think everyone is responsible for their own risk.
Yes.
But putting my old federal government hat on, sorry, you're thinking about what the nation looks like for risk. And it's not just one company here, one company here. It's the aggregated risk together. You probably have a different view of that than companies.
Which
But if
may come to different risk decision making
Right.
because of that.
And if you explain that, though, to companies, I think that's really where that maybe that disconnect between your definition and theirs could be bridged.
Brian Brown, so I guess you can hear me okay. Excellent panel, thank you very much. So I guess I have a little bit easier question. So Norman, this is kind of towards you and as well. So as a company, what's the legal implication of your cyber risk, right? Because cybersecurity costs money and lawyers cost money. I mean, I know your firm is very reasonably priced with your rates, but
Well, they're worth every dollar, I'm
We,
sure.
we are worth every dollar that you pay us and more.
and a lot much more than that. But what's the legal implication thereof, and obviously what's the business implication? What's the dollars and cents and sort of the ROI? And I will now sit down. Thank you.
Okay, point number one, all the questions were supposed to be for Bob. No, just kidding. No, I am here. Well, let me say this. I'm not going to give you legal advice today. I do think that it is important to understand that the broader world believes that cyber is part of your normal risk. And it depends on what sector you're in and where you fit and if you're regulated or not. But the awareness, there's an expectation that you have the awareness. And then how you manage and mitigate that risk is really dependent on your regulatory structure and your other requirements. I think the piece that's important, because I don't know what sector that you're in, the cross-sector components are really important to understand, your supply chain and other things. And so that's usually when we talk to companies about how do you look at your risk and what should you think about. We run through things like that. We talk about resources that DHS and other people can have. We'll ask about your insurance, but things like that. And happy to talk about that more afterwards.
Clear. Hi, Clay.
Thanks, Norman. Bob, congratulations on this new post and good luck. I know it's quite a challenge you've undertaken. I just had a question about something you re-raised CPAC and PCII. I just want to ask for an update on the PCII. A couple of years ago, DHS had initiated a process to update those rules, and I'm just curious as to whether that is now going to get restarted, given the focus on trust and authorities.
I think that, there was a sort of pause on regulatory activities at the transfer of administration and, looking at what we were doing. I think the PCII update certainly is something that remains a regulatory framework that we want to push. Regulatory is the wrong one. Rulemaking framework that we want to push because there's nothing sort of regulatory there. So it got swept up a little bit in that pause, but we will be following up and we will be building off the process and the comments we've already taken and the feedback we've already taken. One of the big things we want to do with the update, of course, is provide as much clarity as possible on cybersecurity information and how to take advantage of the fact that collecting cybersecurity information on vulnerabilities at machine speed is a different process than the original use case for PCII.
Yeah, good point. Well, we're excited to hear that. Next question.
Hi, Bob. Scott Sharon from Alstom. Heard today quite a bit about the example of the elections and how DHS is working at the state level to tackle that. And when I look at the critical infrastructure areas, in many cases, the customer for that critical infrastructure is also state and sometimes local entities. How does your new organization work with state and local governments in their procurements of critical infrastructure to ensure that they also are aware of some of the risks that you're aware of at the federal level?
Yeah, I think the supply chain is a perfect example of, as we work to better provide ability for us to make, within federal government, to make risk-based decisions of things we're procuring in the supply chain, as that information gets out to owners and operators, there's an example for state and local government to take advantage of what we're learning for our own procurement decisions. So that's one example. In terms of, functional identification and prioritization, I think that, part of what's inherent in a lot of what we're talking about, Norma, your answer to that question, is know where your own risk is. We can help we have capability to help understand where risks are, and that will then push that kind of thinking down. You know, we'll work explicitly with state and local governments depending on the nature of the risk that we're prioritizing, risk to election infrastructure. A lot of that's owned, to keep going with this, owned by state and local governments, and so that's a case where we'll work directly. Then there are other things where hopefully our work and what we're doing through the center will inspire, you know, a better functional understanding of risks at different levels.
Well, I think we may have taken up a little bit more of your time than we had planned today, but we were very excited really to hear about the center and the new cybersecurity strategy. I can't wait to read it. Personally, I hope it's 150 pages in font 3. That'll be weekend reading for me personally.
Somebody will have to pay a lawyer to
I
explain what's in the strategy.
See, I
so.
can explain what's in the strategy. Is there anything else you wanted to mention or share before we just really thank you for your time?
No,
and your
I mean,
effort?
you referenced half jokingly that we'll come back and talk about functions, but we want to do a lot more of talking about what we're doing in the center in fora like this, so we can explain, we get feedback, and you know, we're open for business and look forward to working with many of the people in this room.
Well, thank you, Bob. Join me in thanking Bob for talking about the new center.